When I hear about books that are burning, then I always get an uncomfortable feeling. Because just like a pain in your chest and a shortness of breath could indicate an upcoming heart attack, books that are on fire are in most cases one of the symptoms that freedom is about to be taken away from a society. This episode is all about the disaster of burning books. Welcome to part 3 of the episodes called Old Books and One Disaster. I want to ask you a question. Do you remember the largest library fire ever in the history of the United States? Yes or no? Well, I didn't know anything about it. Here's a little help. The fire happened in 1986. Still no recollection, like me? Or do you say, of course, I remember it. I was asking myself, when 1 million books are burned or damaged, then this is a major disaster. Then why I don't have even the slightest memory of ever hearing about this? I would assume that such an event is supposed to be world news. Well, the facts are that on April the 29th in 1986, hundreds of firefighters fought for 7 hours the devastating fire in the Central Library of Los Angeles. And at that moment, about 1 million books were damaged and 400,000 books were totally destroyed. Now, why do most people don't know about this major disaster? This is because a couple of days earlier, a nuclear accident occurred in Chernobyl, in the Ukraine. In those days, that country was a part of the former Soviet Union. And for weeks and months, this horrible and dangerous event was dominating the world news. And I'm sure that many people of my generation will vividly remember the Chernobyl incident. So what happened was that the disaster of thousands of books that were burning in Los Angeles was upstaged by the nuclear explosion. And that was, of course, an important event that was potentially threatening all of mankind. So it is understandable that the news of the fire did not break through as world news. Among the many people who also did not know about this event and who lived in the United States during the time of the fire is the writer Susan Orlean. And therefore she decided to tell the story of this almost unknown disaster in her book called The Library Book. I bought the book in New York just before the lockdown started, and initially I thought it was fiction. When I started reading about the fire, I even looked it up online to check if there was any news footage about that fire. And of course there was. The story was clearly not fiction at all. We learn from Susan Orlean's book that the investigators of the fire were convinced that the cause of the fire was arson. Although the fire safety of the library was problematic for years. Already in 1967, a report from the fire department concluded that the probability of a major fire at the library was very high. And the Los Angeles Times called the library part temple, part cathedral, and part fire hazard. Now, throughout the book we learn about a man who is the suspect of starting the fire in the library. We learn about his background, his habits, his career, or the lack of one, and Susan even talks to family members, and she gives a detailed description of his personality. But the story is told in such a way that throughout the book you ask yourself, did he do it or not? And it's only at the end of the book that we learn more about the conclusion of this particular storyline. Just like a good book should be, you are drawn into the story that she tells. And along the way we learn not only about the fire and the suspect, but about so much more. Susan succeeds in just 315 pages to inform us about how libraries work, how important they are for the communities around them, something I wasn't aware of at all. She tells the captivating history of the Library of Los Angeles. That in itself is an incredible story, because we learn how the function of a library throughout time extends and evolves. And then she also informs us about the meaning of book burnings. And finally, she tells us about herself and her mother, and the memories that they could no longer share about their many joint visits to the library when she grew up, because her mother suffered from Alzheimer. While she is writing this book, her mother unfortunately passes away. And when she talks about this, she shares with us this incredible analogy from Senegal, where apparently the polite expression for saying that somebody died is to say that his or her library has burned. This is quite an image she presents there. The memories inside us are like a private library of our lives. And when we die, all this is suddenly gone. I must say that besides the fact that this is an informative book, I'm also really happy that I read it. Because through this book, you learn many new things about books and about the importance of libraries to mankind. But I'm also impressed by her compelling way of telling the story. How do you bring so many storylines in one story of only 315 pages, and this without overwhelming the reader and without being boring for a moment? Maybe one reason why her story is so compelling is that she brings us along with her while she discovers all these facts about the fire, about the library, about book burnings in general, and about the suspect of the arson. There are many intriguing facts that she shares. One of them is about the thousands of books that were damaged due to the water used by the firefighters. And these damaged books were hastily put into refrigerated trucks and brought to food warehouses nearby. This was to prevent that mold would develop on the pages, which could ultimately destroy the books. Once the books were frozen, they were stored on racks in food warehouses between frozen shrimps and broccoli. After 2 years of being frozen, the aerospace manufacturer McDonnell Douglas offered to try drying the first batch of 20,000 books. They developed a procedure that involved their space simulation chamber to defrost and dry the books without further damaging them. It is an impressive demonstration of ingenuity in our modern times to save books, which are of course one of the oldest ways of storing our human knowledge. The library book by Susan Orlean is a kind of book that makes you hungry to learn more about the many subjects that she talks about. To give you an example, a couple of weeks after I read the book, I visited Montolieu, which is one of the 8 book villages in France. It's a charming little village, and because Susan Orlean talked so much about libraries and librarians in her book, I bought this book from 1970 called An Introduction to Librarianship. If I wouldn't have read the book by Susan Orlean, I would not have paid attention to this book. By the way, I found this book in the only English bookstore in the village, called Librairie Abelard. It's such a nice and cozy bookstore with a very nice owner. Anyway, back to the story. Next to all the interesting facts and insights that she shares, Susan also mentioned several books that caught my attention. One of them is the book Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, published in 1953. This book is a dystopian novel about a time in the future where books are forbidden and where the task of firefighters is to search for books hidden in the homes of people and to burn them. Sometimes they even burn the books together with their owners. The main character is Guy Montag, a firefighter who starts to think for himself again and who is tempted to start reading some of the books that he is supposed to destroy. And that has of course consequences for himself and for others. Although this is a fictional story, It plays with the idea of what happens when governments or other groups try to take a monopoly on what they call the truth. And we all know that if governments do this, they discredit information based on facts and they fabricate a story about history and about the present to cover up the facts that they can't accept. This part is of course not fiction, and that is why this book, although published for the first time in 1953, is unfortunately still relevant today. Denouncing facts is, throughout history, a consistent pattern of deception by leaders who care more about power and their own reputation than about the truth and the well-being of the societies or communities that depend on their leadership. If you are looking for books on how to detox from fake news and alternative facts, then you can check out 2 episodes on Bold Books and Bones where I present books that can help. Now, throughout history, we see that when freedom is taken away from a society, then burning of books is almost always one of its severe symptoms. And therefore, I want to share with you in the next episode another book that I discovered via Susan Orlean. This book is mentioned in her overview of books and articles that she used as a resource when writing the library book. The book is called Books on Fire and gives an overview of all the book burnings throughout history. I thought that the burning of the Library of Alexandria was a unique and exceptional event. But after reading this book, I know that I could not have been more wrong. Stay free, and I hope to see you soon at Bold Books and Bones. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts with the Bold Books and Bones community via the comment section. Bye.